But yes, thank you. For many of you, your return viewers to SIPE's webinar series, as you know, during the coronavirus, we've adapted many of the events that we do in Washington, D.C. to these virtual events, and we're hopeful that you have been learning a lot over these topics. And today we're incredibly fortunate to have Rachel Muthoga with us today. Rachel is a private sector advocacy consultant with over 15 years experience serving as an advocate in the High Court of Kenya. Most recently, she was the former deputy CEO of KEPSA, and also before that was the director of Moving Goalposts, where she led work on advocacy for the rights of young women's reproductive health, economic empowerment, and financial inclusion. And so Rachel's with us today to talk about private sector advocacy, and we are incredibly excited to have her. So many of you are familiar with the structure of these webinars, but just to reiterate, Rachel will go through her presentation today. And if you have questions during that presentation, you're welcome to either put them in the chat box, and I believe Rachel will actually be facilitating some conversation in the chat. But you can also make your questions in the Q&A, and we'll make time to get to those at the end. And also at the end, you'll be able to raise your hand and ask questions over the audio if that's your preference. And as I mentioned, it's being recorded today, and you should be able to find the recording on the SIPE website before the end of the week. Yeah, that's our plan for today. And without further ado, I will allow Rachel to take over. Rachel, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Michael, and I'm really excited to be here and to be here with the listeners from Nigeria. I see Machakos, Cape Town, and all the different places where we're doing the work that we're doing. And this is an interesting time, I would say an interesting time to be alive, an interesting time to be doing advocacy work, because we are really being tested and we are really having to think outside of the usual and to go beyond the usual way of working. Of course, COVID-19 has, as a worldwide pandemic, has had a big impact on business and also on business advocacy. The environment that it has created is one of uncertainty, lack of clarity, where we have mixed messages, and many times those affect not just ourselves as businesses or business advocacy bodies, but also the decision makers. So in many cases, we've seen that there has been a lack of clarity on what is the best way that we can be able to move forward in order to have a good balance between saving lives and preserving life, but also being able to ensure that the economy is continuing to work. And as we continue to understand and as we continue to go forward, we are still going to have to accept and to understand that this pandemic has already had a big impact on our economies, each of us. We see numbers saying that it's a slowdown of somewhere between 6 and 10% for global economies. And as businesses and as business representatives, it's really important that we are able to engage with governments and decision makers in order to have the best outcome despite the situation that we find ourselves in. And so that then is the importance of emphasizing that the fact that it's not business as usual cannot then mean that we're not undertaking any advocacy or that we are waiting until, should I say, the world reopens in order for us to continue to undertake advocacy. So I just wanted to start off with that introduction, and then I'll ask Michael to take us to the first slide. So advocacy by definition, and this is just to restate what I'm sure that all of you know, it's a proactive effort to influence policy in an open and transparent manner, and it makes private sector an effective contributor to dialogue. So the first part of it is that it always involves dialogue, and we know that for those of us who have worked in associations, in chambers, amongst other bodies, that dialogue usually means that we are building relationship, we are trying to ensure that we are being heard and that we're building the authority, being the thought leaders in the areas of work that we do. But beyond it being about dialogue, it's also looking for areas of convergence and mutual understanding. That means being able to put yourself in the shoes of the policymaker, understand what his or her challenges are, and also be able to find a point of meeting of the minds where you can be able to then say, okay, so we have mutual understanding on what the challenge is, what the program is, and this is what we think we can do going forward. So it also reaches beyond dialogue as it builds pressure for reform as private sector presses its case. So it's not just a lovely conversation. It's not just tea and crumpets. It's also that you're trying to actually come out of that meeting, out of that engagement, out of that dialogue with a very clear outcome that is positive for business and that helps businesses to grow and to thrive. So I just wanted to lay that foundation, and based on that, we're going to then see how is this impacted by the fact that we have now had the crisis that we have seen ourselves in. And so if you can take us on to the next slide. So I'm sure many of you have seen this slide before, the three-legged stool. Three-legged stool that is the basis on which advocacy stands. The first being direct engagement, public relations, and public policy. Direct engagement usually refers to direct action, where private sector is actually doing the work itself to either set standards, do training, ensure that services that are being, that the industry data and other important tools of business are actually being accessed by businesses that we represent, and that we are able to then ensure that we have independent certification and actually we're running businesses in a way that is appropriate. Then we have public relations and public education, which means the work that we do more outward, speaking to consumers and educating the public in order for them to understand what businesses are doing, in order for them to better understand the positive changes that we are making to products, to make sure that they're healthier, to make sure that they're better for the user, and then also engaging even in debate on issues of social justice, issues of economic justice, which are important, especially if you look at the environment that we're in right now with the movements that we have seen coming up. And the third and most important is also, and that, well, we can debate which is the most important, and the third is now actually being able to impact on policy making. But those three are the tools that are typically available to us on, should I call it the normal seasons, when we are doing work as usual. But when we find ourselves in a crisis and we are having to pick and choose what strategies to use, then we might find that we are leaning on one or the other. And I'm really interested to hear at this point, for those of you who are working, advocating, or representing businesses, or who are in various chambers, in the last, from March onwards, I think from when we declared that this is an international pandemic, which of those three do you find yourself, have you found yourself using or leaning on the most in the last few months? And it would be great if you can just give us your answer in the chat, so that we can be able to see what you've been, which of the three. Have you been doing more of public policy? Have you been doing more of public relations? Have you been engaged more in direct engagement? So I'll give you a minute to type in.
And Rachel, if you'd like to read out some of these answers, since we're only seeing them as panelists.
Okay, so I can see that Sarah Kuruso is telling us that she's been engaged more in direct engagement, more with the policymakers in relevant areas. Thank you, Manzi Jamin. You say that you've done both direct engagement and public relations. Claire, direct engagement. Beatrice is telling us she's done more public relations. Huda Yusuf, more of direct engagement. Cyril has been involved in direct engagement. It looks like direct engagement has also been a large part of it, and public relations and public policy, both with members and government. And what you have found, and really why I want us to have this conversation, is that finding ourselves in a situation that we are in, where we are in a crisis, the first thing that happens is that the authorities that we seek to engage, their attention span is immediately diminished by the fact that the economy is under siege. There are challenges that they're trying to resolve. And so you, as one of the many voices that is speaking to them, you must be very strategic and ask yourself, at this point in time, am I raising an issue that is current? Am I raising an issue that is relevant? Or am I trying to push for something that might not necessarily be top on the list, and therefore I might be seen more as a distraction as opposed to a value add. And so when you're looking at a lot of the challenges that businesses have had, if you think about, especially for hotels and restaurants, the biggest challenge was how can we have social distancing? How can we ensure that there are health safeguards? And so you must then, as private sector, then potentially sit inward and look at what are the standards and policies that we can set up, that we can propose to decision makers that would enable them to then say, okay, we feel safe enough to reopen, as opposed to just leaving policymakers to think around what are the potential protocols that they need to set up for you. At the same time is also public relations. And I'd like to give the example here of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. Being in Kenya, that's the one that I understand the work that they've done the most. And one of the key strategies that the Private Sector Alliance used is that very immediately at the beginning of the pandemic, it was having a direct engagement with government. Even before there was clarity as to what was going to change, even before we knew what lockdown would look like, being able to say, this is what we think is important for business, but more so, this is what we think we can do with you as government from a business perspective. And so this public relations also enables that to ensure that even as government is making its decisions, one, you're aware. In other words, you are sitting, you are having forums and conversations with government, your proposals are on the table, and you're able to then say, this is what would be good for the economy, and this is what we are proposing for businesses. As opposed to just leaning back and waiting and saying, we will be able to engage once government decides the way forward. And what that looks like on the ground is being able to provide weekly briefs that actually go to both members of the business association, but also to government, in order to be able to do some scenario drawing, in order to start looking at what are the priority sectors, in order to talk about which are the sectors that are going to be most impacted by this crisis, and then be able to say, this is what we would propose and government does in view of this. So you have all these brilliant proposals that you want to be able to express to government, but you must be very strategic, because in times of pandemic, the government and the authorities are not working as usual. And so you have to really think through what is the most important message that you can pass, but also how will we be perceived by the authorities that we're working with? Are we coming as partners and friends, or are we coming in a combative fashion saying, no, if you do X and Y, you're going to kill my business, so that we are forcing them into a corner? So being very strategic and deciding, this is what I need for now, this is what's important, and this is what we can that is actually practical for the time that we find ourselves in. So I just wanted to have that quick conversation, and then if you can take us on to the next slide, Michael. So you've got these brilliant proposals, right? You've looked at the different sectors of your economy, you've looked at the different associations that you represent, they've had their chance to speak, and now you're looking at how do we then proceed to speak to government. And in looking at various reports that have come out of the various chambers that I've been able to access in Kenya, it's clear that there have been quite a number of challenges. The first, of course, which is a challenge that we faced with everything, is the lack of access to normal channels of engagement. You potentially have within your structured engagement roundtable meetings that are predetermined, that are pre-scheduled, and you actually have a calendar that you're pursuing with your advocacy strategy. All of a sudden, you find everyone is working from home. Government offices don't want to receive hard copies of letters. Basically, you are not able to even host meetings with the team and with the association members. And so you find that you are really not having the access to the channel of engagement that you're used to. Another thing is also the attention being diverted, because even the businesses that you represent, as important to them as these policy issues are, as the environmental issues are, they are struggling with bread and butter issues. So if a business is really struggling to stay afloat, or they're trying to move from maybe selling physically, and I'm busy trying to transition my business into selling online, to be honest, what will make me prioritize attending a chamber meeting? So you must be very clear about what the offering would be. But then beyond that is also just time and travel limitations of lockdowns and curfews. What you'll find in Kenya is that in the last 2 hours, just before the curfew closes, is we have so much traffic, because suddenly everyone is trying to do as much as they can in the city and then dash out or at least, and dash home just at the last, just before the curfew happens. And so the previous, space that you would have enjoyed of having long conversations, arguing back and forth, being able to drill down the issues and be able to express them properly in your memorandum of issues, you don't have that anymore. You don't have the access to that capacity, even internally, to be able to have such deeper meetings with your members and also to do the work that needs to be done. Another challenge that chambers have expressed is the unresponsiveness of government agencies and the authorities. They too are scrambling to respond to the crisis at hand. What happened is, I know for many of our government agencies, they were caught between spending time and energy on enforcement or trying to do business as usual. And of course, that creates a certain confusion. They are waiting on instructions from headquarters. They're waiting on counties to make decisions on the way forward. And so no one wants to be the one that's putting their head up and saying, no, I think we should focus on this, when the environment is that mixed up with lack of information and lack of clarity. So you find that government agencies will receive the letters or will receive your memoranda, and they will wait. And they'll take a wait and see attitude, which then means that as much as you're engaging, as much as you're speaking with them, even if you have an opportunity to be heard, you're not getting the traction with the issues that you would typically get if you are having the usual space that we have when we're not in a crisis. And also the potential inability to prioritize advocacy issues while dealing with relicensing of businesses to reopen. And this is actually an internal issue within the business association, where you have to ask yourselves, what for us is priority? What are we going to push for the hotels sector? What are we going to push for in the IT sector? What are we going to push for in each of the different sectors that would enable each sector to reopen? And what protocols are we then going to propose? And so I've seen this process going on. We've done this process ourselves internally. And what you find is that businesses either are paralyzed and so are not being able to be as responsive, or have clashing interests. And so the business association then becomes particularly important, because then the association really has to give thought leadership, even to its members, to be able to say, we need to be reasonable about what we are going to table in the memorandum of issues. And then we can be able to say, this is what we think is important, this is what can go forward, and be able to work together as a team and come out with one voice. Because as long as there's disjointed advocacy, as long as there's lack of clarity in the message, then you're less likely to even be heard by a government or a body or an authority that is in crisis. So being able to prioritize advocacy issues and be able to come out with clear memorandum of issues that you're then able to present and be able to come out with, that would then be able to be presented to the authorities. So that's it. That's it for that slide. So it's really important to reprioritize during the crisis. And reprioritize means, that means your association has to have had a good, clear strategy to begin with. And that you're now coming to say, we had a strategy, we are now in this situation, what are we changing, what are we focusing on? It's particularly important that you have a driving strategy that is strong and robust. For us in Kenya, the Kenya Private Sector Alliance has the National Business Agenda. And this National Business Agenda is actually a long-term document that looks at all sectors of the economy and that has a 5-year life. The Chamber also has a strategy. The Kenya National Chamber of Commerce also has a strategy document. And why it's important to have those is that when you find yourself in crisis, you shouldn't just start looking around and saying, oh, what could potentially be important? You need to say, okay, out of these issues, these advocacy issues that we are pursuing, what are the ones that we can prioritize, and which are the ones that we will wait with for now until we come back, and so that we can be able to then still be using the template that we had already agreed on, but doing it differently, so pivoting differently. The same way that SIPE has been having gatherings, and so the difference was, okay, so rather than having these gatherings in person, let us now have these gatherings on Zoom or on Ring Central. If they had never had these gatherings before, do you think that the organization would have been to pivot as easily or as fast as it was? Potentially no. Or they would now be struggling with, okay, so what are the topics we could potentially discuss? What do you think we could be telling our associations and chambers that we work with? But being able to have a strong strategy that you're then repositioning, that you then be able to change, is really important. So in terms of changing, so I've talked a bit about changing the agenda. That means being able to pick and choose the issues that you're going to prioritize, and also the methodology of implementing it. I know for a number of associations, I could see that there were some that were quick to then say, okay, can we take our meetings online? Can we start to have the same sector committee meetings? Can we quickly do them online? While other associations still took time to figure out the environment, figure out what's going on. But so the fast movers, the organizations that are able to quickly organize themselves, quickly reorganize themselves and be able to come back with clarity on the list of issues, are the ones who are more likely to be able to have an impact. But more importantly is also that in crisis, people tend to not have the level of cohesion that you'd typically have. And it's because of all these factors that we've talked about, the uncertainty, the lack of clarity. Some sectors are more impacted while others are actually thriving. Because if you think about it, if you're in manufacturing of masks or PPEs, then you're doing well, right? If you're doing delivery services, we've seen for all the companies that, Jumia, Sendi, and others that we have in Kenya, they're actually thriving. And so speaking to someone from that sector, vis-a-vis a sector that is seriously impacted, people like those who do flowers, those others who do other products for export, where those economies have also shut down, you're not going to easily find that they're speaking the same language. So the leadership of the business association must be very clear and have a clear strategy for engagement and dialogue, even within the association, so that you can create that sense of teamwork and also be able to ensure that you're continuing to engage and maintaining momentum for the advocacy that needs to be done. So one of the things that have been really useful is quickly getting members to understand the need to draft a new strategy, to redraft the strategy, so that being able to host, be it an online meeting, be it now if you're allowed a social distanced meeting, be whatever that needs to be done, is to get the members to redraft the new strategy. And to, even if you're not able to gather everyone, you can get a leadership team who can think through the issues and then be able to share it to the rest of the members. This for us was very helpful in Kenya, because what we ended up doing is creating a document that is both that is a back to business strategy, but that also talks about the larger economic issues, including issues relating to stimulus programs, including looking at how the various interventions that government would have to make, and issues even relating to tax incentives that can be put on the ground that can actually have a positive impact on businesses, and to be able to help so that employment and other factors are considered, and that we're able to have a safety net for as much of the society as we can. So being able to push this, to have a strategy to push the objectives, is also important. And so that has to be work that the association leads, and that the association thinks through, and that the association is active in pivoting and turning around to be able to respond to the new issues, so that the membership is not the one coming to say, oh, what are we doing about this, or what are we doing about the other, but the association is actually ahead and is able to say, come, we want you to engage with this process that we have set up. We want you to engage with this draft of a document that we have set up, so that the members actually feel that the association is doing the best that they can, even during this time of crisis. Okay, thanks, Michael. On to the next. So channels of engagement. So you've got this wonderful strategy that you've designed, but you need to think through what works best for you. I know for us, what has worked is changing the usual channels, but also ensuring that we are maintaining relationships. So telephone calls instead of letters, but also telephone calls that are not just, hey, I'm calling to express to you the advocacy strategy that we've created, but also telephone calls that are ensuring that you're continuing to build the relationship with the government and leaders and heads of authorities that you already work with. You know, if you already have a relationship with the Minister for Trade, did you call him up and say, I know that this is a difficult time, we're looking forward to working with your office, I just want to reaffirm our partnership at this time, and we will soon be sending to you our advocacy strategy. That makes a big difference. That ensures that the minister in charge understands that he or she is not alone in the struggle, but that they have a partner in the business association that they've already been working with that will continue to work with them. So also meetings online instead of roundtable. This might take some time for your members to get used to, but it has really worked. And also being able to ask for online meetings with the government agencies, because much as we know that, much as I don't know how it is in other countries, but for us it's not the norm. But we saw that even cabinet meetings were being hosted on Zoom. We actually saw that the East African heads of state actually did have an online meeting to discuss trade within the region. And so being able to then say, okay, even for our platform, we would like to be able to use this. And then the third is email proposals as opposed to hard copy memoranda. The reality is more people are spending much more time online. On a normal day, I would never email a memorandum of issues to a minister's office because typically I know it will get lost in some email, it might never be read. But now, because of the situation that we find ourselves in, it's more likely to be prioritized. One, because the need for the support is there. But two, as long as you have gone through the process of ensuring that the relationship continues to stand and that the relationship is still there, then you'll be able to see that even email communication is likely to have that same positive impact that it might not have had if you had tried to do emails when we were doing advocacy in the usual fashion. So it's really important that you understand that this channel of engagement has to be based on relationships. You're not going to just suddenly be sending memorandum to people who you've never spoken to, who have not met you face to face, who are not even sure about why it's important to listen to you. The chances of you getting a positive impact out of that are slim to zero. But being able to ensure that one, you're working with the relationships that you already have, and if you need to form new relationships, be it new committees that have been formed, be it new people who have been appointed to offices, that you take time to still build relationships and then be able to work with them with regards to memoranda. So that's the issue of relationships in advocacy is still going to remain very important, and potentially is likely to be even more important now, because in a crisis, you're trying to ensure that the person that you're speaking to understands why they should listen to you. Why should they pay attention to you? So you really must build the relationship and show them the show of partnership that will then say, okay, let's get the chamber's opinion on this issue. I think they're likely to support us in making these decisions. So that's really going to be the basis for why these new channels of engagement will actually be successful in doing the work that you need to do. Okay. So strategies for success. Don't just ask for what you need. I think this is a life's lesson in every partnership, in every relationship. Don't just ask for what you need. Be able to offer support. The Kenyan example is one where when the pandemic hit, of course, there was great concern about people living in slums, people who don't have access to water on a normal basis, on a normal day, so that for them, when you tell them, ensure that you're washing hands, ensure that you're social distancing, ensure that you have washing hands with soap and water. If I don't have soap and water, so what we did as the private sector is, sorry, excuse me, is to quickly organize and to say, this is what the private sector can put together in the way of resources that can be donated to the poorer members of the society. And being able to then, as the apex body, be able to speak to the, or as the business association, to speak to the different businesses that are in your membership and say, oh, you're a water company, are you able to help us to get water? Or you are a plastics company, are you able to help us to be able to get the large containers that the water can be stored in for community use? Or actually companies that, one good example is the East Africa breweries that are actually set aside from their normal manufacturing, set aside a certain line of manufacturing that they now transformed to be able to manufacture sanitizers that would be able to then be distributed into the communities. You can imagine when you go to government with that package and say, we know that there's a crisis, we have a number of issues that we want to ask for your consideration, but this is what we are coming to the table with. This is what our members have actually put together. They have compiled as joint support for you, as both as government, but also as the community, even as we all work through this issue. Then the opportunity to be heard is likely to be higher. And then that also starts the conversation on a very positive note, even before you get into your advocacy issues. So building relationships by engaging the local community, so that you're also in the process of maybe doing the types of donations that I have discussed, you're also then farming up your relationships with the local community, and that things that can actually, and that will continue to support the business community, not just for the time of crisis, but also beyond the crisis. But also practicality is a major consideration. So ensure that the proposals that you're making are implementable, that these are things that government can actually work with. Because knowing the health considerations, the challenges that you've had, to then insist, no, we must have X, or we must have Y, or we don't want you to shut down, to lock down the city because it will affect businesses. Okay, so you must really go there with reasonable proposals that then would actually be listened to, because what you don't want to do is to be dismissed because of impracticality of the proposals that you're making. And so you want to ensure that you're working really hard to propose things that they can actually be able to say yes to, and to be able to move on. So flexibility. I know that with the crisis, many government institutions, many bodies have actually been working very long hours and trying to come up with resolution of issues. So being able to say, okay, I know we work 8 to 5 hours, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., but if the person who you need to engage with is only available for this meeting, for this call, beyond those hours, really understand that this is not business as usual, and so take the opportunity when it's offered to you and be able to engage. So beyond that was, so the last one is about drafting protocols. So we all know that one of the things is that even as cities reopen, and even as we say we are going back to the normal, we know that it will not be normal. We know that each sector will have to have new standard operating procedures, that there will be new protocols that will need to be put in place to ensure that we are still safeguarding health. So rather than just going to say, we want to see what is the draft protocol that government is putting in place, it would be better for private sector, the association itself, to sit and draft these proposed new standards. So that by the time you go to the meeting, you're actually going to say, oh, this is our proposal. What do you think? Is it workable? And you're able to then negotiate and come to a conclusion that hopefully is suitable and supportive for both sides, and that can actually have a chance to succeed. I know that one of the challenges is when maybe the government just sits and puts a draft, and it might actually be very good for health, but then for health and health safety, but it might be terrible for continuing, to have businesses thriving. It might actually mean a great loss of jobs. So being able to balance those two issues and say, okay, so this is our proposal. This is how we think we can still reopen, but we can be able to work in a way that we're able to safeguard the health of our workers and also of our customers. So being able to be the one that goes in with a draft that reduces the labor that the government has to go into, or that the authorities have to go into and say, this is our proposal. Please consider it, please look into it, and then see how much of it you can use. And then we are open to discussion, to negotiation, to make sure that we come back to an amicable position for what the protocols would be going forward. So those are really important and would be able to give you a higher chance of success rather than just waiting or trying to do business as usual. Michael? So a number of considerations. This is just to wrap up or to reaffirm what I've just talked about. Issues of empathy, practicality, and flexibility. Those are really important in order for us to be able to work in a cooperative manner with the decision-making bodies as we go along. On to the next one. So I really wanted us to have an example of a case study, because all those things that I've said sound like they would then lead us to a path of great success. And once we've followed the rules sort of advocacy, then we will find that we have succeeded and that our advocacy is working. But we know that we do this work in difficult environments. And so I have a case study here of the Turkana Chamber of Commerce. And the Turkana Chamber of Commerce is a chamber of commerce that's working in the northern region of Kenya. And they already have a good working relationship with the agencies and the authorities that are in that region. But they have found, and in speaking with members, that businesses in the region are struggling, not just because of the pandemic, but because of certain factors that have come out of the issues of oversight during the pandemic. The first is that there's a lot of harassment of businesses during the enforcement of curfew. So this means that either businesses are being harassed to close, like when the time has been changed so that, before we had a curfew that said 7 p.m., now it's 9 p.m. Authorities are not willing to then move, those 2 hours up, or to move those 2 hours up, or to give businesses more time to work. And so this is really unfair, and the chamber actually believes that it's standing in the way of businesses being able to go back to actually having some profits, because of course the length of time of opening is also very important. Then limited opportunity for certification as having complied with back to business protocols, because as long as the certifying body or the authorizing body is located far from where the businesses are and it's not been decentralized, then that continues to be a cost for business, where staff have to go and get tested, where staff have to go and be recertified by the Ministry of Health, where you have to go and fill in forms and be able to pay for new permits. Then those services need to be brought closer to where businesses are. But the chamber has found that that has been a big challenge for them. And also institutional overreach by regulatory authorities. And really this institutional overreach can also be defined as corruption, where the enforcers of the new protocols and the enforcers are actually using this as an opportunity to then harass members and also to be able to get some money out of it. So this has been a consistent, this is consistent not just in Turkana, but across many chambers that have been looking at how as Kenya goes back towards being open for business, how it's working. And so this case study is really representative of what businesses in Kenya are going through. And I really would like us to spend some time to just think through. So we've seen the problem that the chamber is having, and with the conversation that we've had about undertaking advocacy in crisis. And Michael, if you can take us to the next slide. I'd like us to think, and I'm hoping that we can be able to just do it in the chat section as a team, think about trying to engage with the ministry official who's in charge of trade regarding the back to business protocols and the issues that I've just raised above. Think about the unfairness of the enforcement, the harassment by officials. So the official who is in charge has been held up in many cabinet meetings, and it's not possible to meet him in person. With an urgent timeline to restart business operations, please outline steps that you'd undertake to get the back to business protocols passed, and also the issues that you're discussing that I've raised above clarified and dealt with. So I think it would be good if we can just share in the chat with, I think we're able to just talk about what are some of the strategies that you think you would apply faced with that situation. I'll give you some time. You can just go into the chat and just give me your reactions and also your strategies. I haven't seen anything come up on the chat yet.
Rachel, as we give people time to write in the chat with what their, let me start my video, with what their strategy might be and what steps they might undertake in order to get back to business protocols. One of my questions for you, as you were talking about the importance of relationships, is how would you suggest building a new relationship virtually with a minister that you didn't know How would you start that to the point where you have the relationship in which you can schedule meetings and actually have a running dialogue with them?
Okay, that's really interesting because, of course, I mean, particularly interesting right now in Kenya because a cabinet reshuffle is in the offing. So we know that some of the people who we already have good, strong relationships with might not be in those same positions maybe in the coming week. But in being able to respond to, so you've got a new person in charge, you've got a new minister in charge, and you need to engage them to be able to speak to them, but you can only do it virtually. The first thing is to say that usually when you relate with a minister, you don't only relate with the minister himself. You usually have directors in the same ministry, secretaries in the same ministry, and other people that you have already a strong, solid relationship with. So that even when the minister moves, you still have other relationships that have been left in the ministry that you work with. And so being able to use those relationships to say, hi, we're actually trying to reach out to the new minister, we would like to engage with him. Are you able to introduce us? Are you able to just speak about the important partnership that we have had before? And can you emphasize to him that it would be good for him to meet with us? And that then gives you an opportunity. The other strategy that I would propose, and we've seen this a lot, is that many times you'll see that these are not people who are coming from sort of out of the blue. They would probably be people who have served in the civil service or they've worked in maybe from another ministry. So being able to then look around and say, who else could introduce me? Could it be another minister who you already have a strong relationship that you then say, oh, I'd really like an introduction to your fellow minister. Can you assist me to get that? And that would actually result in you also starting on a strong basis. Because if a fellow minister says, oh, this is a strong partner that I work with and they support me already in the work that I do, I think you should absolutely talk to them. Then they already start the meeting believing that you are a support and a value add to the work that they're about to start doing. So I think that those are the strategies that I can think of and that I think associations should be ready to apply.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, looks like we have a couple of responses here.
Yeah, so Beatrice says we should email him proposals on how to solve the current challenges in business. I like that because as we've said, we know that chances of meeting him in person are slim. There's also a proposal by Ben who says, firstly, engage the county government officials and explain to them the impact of the protocols not being fast, e.g. loss of income and jobs resulting in insecurity, which will create a new problem for administrators. I like that because what it then means is that you're able to show that if you don't solve this problem, this is the other potential problem that you're creating. And being able to say that a failure to engage with the fact that businesses are continuing to lose opportunities and therefore will be more likely to let go of staff, then is likely to create a huge population of unemployed people who are likely to then engage in crime, creating a new problem for administrators. I like that because then it also has to push him to look at what am I trying to balance? I'm trying to balance between being able to have a safe and secure county and also being able to ensure that the back to business protocols work. And I think that's really important and practical because you also have to look at it that the minister is also trying to ensure that he is able to show success. It's important for them to be able to show that their administration is actually effective in the work that they're doing. And so being able to go with proposals that will solve the issues that are on the ground, and then being able to then say, potentially based on what we have emailed you, are you able to then have a phone call? Are you able to have us to have, even if it's a social distance visit, if those are allowed, are you able to then, but having emailed him, having engaged him, having showed him both sides of the coin, then being able to say, can we then have a meeting for us to be able to express the challenges that we are facing, and also for you to look at and engage with the other arms of government that are the ones that are actually creating a lot of these problems for businesses. So it's really important that you strategize and also just, being able to use some of the proposals that I've just put as I was responding to Michael's question with regards to saying, this is the person who we're trying to target. But if we're not able to meet him, does he have a director in his office? Does he have maybe a deputy, who we can be able to reach more easily, and who we can then say, please help us to escalate these issues to the minister. Because what that does is then you have more than one person who is championing for you within the same ministry, even if the minister is the most powerful, but to be able to have also his support team working with you at implementation stage will be really important. So I think that it's really important that you also are trying to reach as many sources of, as many people who can support the fact that you're trying to reach the minister and who can support you in getting the feedback that you need. So that's really important. So I think that's it from what I can see on the chats.
We have one in the Q&A from Carmen, and she says, find allies, other organizations who face the same challenges and have similar solutions, and get them on your side, strengthen numbers. And also says, and find champions, respected people in the business community, former ministers or other high-level former officials who can help you open the door.
Yeah, that's really good. I like the idea of finding allies, because the chamber might actually be one of many organizations that are trying to engage and that are trying to engage with government on different issues, but your voice might not be loud enough, or you might already have said what you're trying to say and have not gotten the response that you need. Finding other organizations, maybe led by unions and others, who might actually be pushing for the same issues would actually add strength, and also giving you strength in numbers, because if they know that, oh, it's this number of organizations and this is the population that they represent in this area, okay, I think I need to pay attention to them. And also the proposal to find champions. We know that especially if you have maybe someone who is a large factory owner who employs a few thousand people, his phone call is more likely to be listened to. And sometimes actually it's true, we do have some business members who are actually in some cases more powerful than the associations, at least from a relationship perspective. Being able to use that champion and say, please call, make this call on our behalf. You as a respected business owner who employs a big number of people in this community are likely to be heard. And so once they're able to open the door, all your proposals are then able to be tabled and to be taken forward. I can see Ryan also has a proposal, and he's proposing that we develop a set of ready-to-implement protocols that the ministry can use and communicate what local businesses are already doing themselves to prepare for reopening. That's true, because that's a really good one, because then to be able to say, these are the problems, and this is our proposed solution, and this is what the protocols ought to look like, then means that you're more likely to come into a meeting where the conversation isn't about, oh, we need protocols, or these protocols do, or this environment doesn't work, but that is like, okay, so let's edit this document that the association has actually presented and be able to make it workable. So really for me, this really just emphasizes the earlier point about doing the work yourself as an association, being ready to do the work. It's not typically it's not your role, yes, but it always makes the conversation go faster if you have the draft that you're actually proposing that to go forward. And we know that government, drafting processes, sometimes they'll say, oh, it's gone to this office, it has gone to that office, it's being considered by, or we are constituting a committee. Yeah, you just hear that and you're tired. So rather than going through all that, being able to develop ready to implement protocols would be a big value addition. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for that question, Ryan. Okay.
You can take us on to the last.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really it for me. And I hope that I've been able to emphasize some of the things that you already know, but also to give you some to-dos that can help you to be able to be successful in the advocacy that you need to undertake. And also, I'm ready for any questions that you may have.
And everybody, you can put your questions either in the Q&A feature or in the chat. And we've opened up the chat now to be visible to all panelists and attendees. Thank you, Rachel, for that presentation. That was wonderfully done, and I think very timely with a lot of the reopening strategies that are now happening as there's more emphasis on advocating for more business-friendly work. Oh, here we have a hand raised. All right. Let's, oops, we may have just lost their connection. Yes, feel free to raise your hand as well. We can unmute your microphone if you'd want to ask a question that way as well. Question from Ben in the chat. Ben asks, how does one strategically use media at this time?
The strategic use of media. Actually, this is the best time to use the media. The reality is that the typical stories that would be in the media for a long time, really all they've had is COVID response numbers, statistics, and being able to then speak to the same issue, which is the pandemic, but from a different perspective, then you're actually adding value to the conversation and actually deepening the conversation. So in terms of how you can strategically use media, would be to be able to then be able to, using your relationships with the media, be able to then either go on talk shows and go to on various radio interviews or TV interviews, and be able to then express the protocols or proposals that you're making to government. And in a respectful fashion, of course, being able to say, this is what we've asked government for. This is what we are hoping that we can be able to pass. This is the impact we think it can have. But it's also a positive opportunity for you to talk about what the business associations are doing in terms of supporting the local community or the people who are more needy in the community. So media can actually be very helpful in helping to also change the thinking and the perspective, so that sometimes you might actually have sent a document to the minister or to the person in charge, but think about the fact that if they're watching you on TV, you're likely to have more time to emphasize your point, to show all angles, to show all, to raise the issues in a much more detailed way than you would have in the document that you emailed to them. So being able to use media and to be able to then further that cause would actually be strategic. I think for us is just to then make sure that we're not sounding like we're just saying, oh, businesses need this, businesses that need that, and forgetting the human interest part of it, but to be able to balance the two and be able to capture the interest of the decision makers who are likely to be watching.
Great. All right, Kunle, I'm going to unmute your phone. There you are. You with us?
Well, I think I went on. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I just wanted to appreciate her for the strategies presented there. I think it's a very nice one, and that will be my takeaway from this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the feedback.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And we've had a few questions come in about sharing the PowerPoints. We can certainly share the slides after this, and we'll also be sharing a recording once it's made available on the SIPE website. We have an internal question. It says, Rachel, from your perspective, which associations do you think are consistently doing well in their advocacy efforts, and why?
Okay, so first is to say that I don't have in my view all the work that is being done by all the different associations, but I would say that the work that the Private Sector Alliance has done has been outstanding. It's been outstanding because it has been so, the engagement and the momentum was never lost. There almost wasn't a lull. There was no time that you could say, oh, after that the association actually stopped its engagement or its advocacy. So it was just, okay, so these are the issues, let's deal with them. These are the challenges, let's resolve. This is the new format of meetings, let's use it. So that, I think, for me was very important. I have seen outstanding work being done by different chambers across the country. I did see the report that Turkana had done, which is the one that actually enabled me to pull out the case study that we've had today. And I think they've continued to engage actively. I know the Embu chamber has also done quite some work in terms of being able to consistently engage with the decision makers. Some of the chambers that I think still I mean, especially in Kenya, where we don't have a standard lockdown for the nation. Yes, we have a national curfew, but certain cities have lockdown while certain counties have lockdowns while other counties don't. So Mombasa and Nairobi are actually on proper lockdown in the sense that you cannot leave the city unless you have a special reason to do so. Those are actually the ones where businesses are most impacted. And so those are the chambers that actually have the most work to do in order to engage with them, with the decision makers and the authorities, so that issues like such as transport and logistics, maintaining value chains, being able to still be able to provide goods, the goods that you typically be able to send out, being able to ensure that the sectors that need to be prioritized continue to be prioritized, that work is particularly important at this time. And so being able to do that, so those two chambers actually have the most work to be able to ensure that they're being heard and that they're being effective in the work that they do. So I can see a question about how do you think advocacy will change as we move away from COVID response to more about reopening the economies? To be honest, we must go from micro to macro. We must think beyond what does my sector need, what does my business need, to how do we recover this economy and how do we get back to a profitable and a positive growth for the larger economy. So that associations must then be able to talk to governments about the larger issues of policies that would then re-inject financing into businesses, but financing also into the larger economy, be it stimulus packages that would be needed, be it new taxation regimes that would be needed. So we need to also be thinking forward and looking ahead and saying, what are the policy decisions that need to be made now that would impact on us later? So to think of it in three ways. So we've got the immediate, which is right now when we're in lockdown or we're in the situations that we're in. We've got the immediate short-term post, which is when we immediately reopen, we know that we won't open fully, but what is our back to business protocol 2? What is our response to level 2 reopening? But then thirdly, how would we then ensure that industries are able to then recover and go back to employing the people that they employ, and that sectors such as tourism that are likely to be most impacted, how are we then safeguarding them so that those companies don't die? So I think we must really go from micro to macro and be able to think about the macroeconomies that would then enable us to go back to growing our economy holistically, so that even our businesses can grow in that positive environment. So I see something from Claire. So I'm hoping everyone is being able to read it so that I don't have to read it loud.
I think it's just available to us as panelists, but it seems as though Claire's question.
Loud because I think it's also, I can just say, she says, so this is Claire, she says, our network is quickly growing in terms of membership, roughly every 3 to 4 days. And in terms of facilitating international trade, mainly from Scottish companies into Africa. So she says they're only 7 months old. This question is, and so the question is, they're not an established private sector network, but how do you know when you're ready to start in an advocacy capacity? Yes, they have government connections and have to work with government in a trade capacity, but never actively advocated on behalf of members. Is this a question of years as a network or size of members base? To be honest, I think it's neither. I think it's, do you think that there's a business issue that you as a company or an association strongly feel needs reform or change? If you look around the business environment and you find any issue that you feel strongly about and that you think impacts on the people that you represent, you're ready, that's it. And so what it takes then is you taking time to do the work with the members that you have. It doesn't matter whether they're few or many, with the members that you have. And you might be thinking about the fact that you're working with Scottish companies to Africa. You might be thinking about the issue of transport and logistics being the biggest impact for transcontinental trade. You might be thinking about standards. And so being able to then dive into that space, understand the environment, understand the challenges, and be able to take a position with your members. You're ready, as long as you're clear that there's a clear business issue that you think you can respond to, I would say proceed. Don't wait until you sort of graduate. There's no graduation. As long as you represent businesses, I think you'll be able to then be able to go ahead and speak to these government officials that you have relationships with, and be able to start to push for some reforms that you feel strongly about. So as the institution grows, you would then be able to step back and have a larger advocacy strategy. But I wouldn't push you to say, wait until you've gotten to this number of people or that number of people, but let the institution get into the practice and the experience of advocating for issues, even as you then broaden your membership, and later you can be able to have a holistic strategy that you're pursuing. So I wouldn't say wait. I would say as long as you're clear on your issue and you have an opinion and that opinion is supported by your members, please proceed. Carmen is asking more about KEPSA, how it mobilizes its members and involves them in advocacy initiatives, especially during lockdown. So as was mentioned earlier, I used to work at KEPSA. I'm in private consultancy, but I still retain my membership. And so now I can speak from a member's perspective. And is to say that KEPSA mobilized its members by using the same. So what had happened is also that, to begin with, KEPSA's engagement with its members is also very online based. So there are actual physical meetings, but all the sectors have WhatsApp groups, there's an email list, and so already there was a lot of work that was going on that would mean that documents can be sent off on email and WhatsApp to members, and members can be able to respond even if they're not able to come to the physical meetings. So already there was that, sort of what I would call a foundation. But what happened is that immediately the organization was able to, first of all, start to speak to its members about the importance of the community engagement response, but then more so to also turn the physical meetings into Zoom meetings. And so all the committees were asked to then start having virtual meetings, and members were asked to log on and supported by the staff team to be able to log on and to be able to participate in the conversations. And happily, this has worked quite well. Of course, it would mean that there would be certain challenges, connectivity, but happily it has actually meant that committees have been able to continue their work, and that we've seen quite some growth in terms of even the participation. What you find is that the numbers that are able to attend the online meetings have been quite high, and that has been really good. And so really it's about ensuring that you don't lose momentum. Because if you've been actively engaging your members before the crisis, because yes, right now we're talking about Corona and the COVID crisis, but we know that we could have many other different types of crises going forward. But if you're already engaging your members strongly when you're not in crisis, when the crisis hits, your first thing to do is to make sure that you don't lose your relationship with your members. That has to be the first and most important priority, that you're speaking to them and that you're seeking their feedback, you're seeking their support, and that you're actually engaging with them. So that really was the thing that really enabled KEPSA to continue to engage with its members and to make it so that the strength of the association continued to be seen even through the crisis. Okay. Thank you so much for the kind compliments about the presentation. So Ryan has a question about the advocacy process. He says it normally involves gathering input from members. In a time of crisis, how do you balance gathering input and verifying recommendations versus a timely response that responds to the emergency? Wow, that's really important. And that's a big challenge because it's an institutional capacity challenge. So you're gathering input and verifying recommendations. But that means if a member says, I think we need a 5% reduction in taxes for this item, you need to have the internal capacity within the institution to analyze that proposal, to be able to say, this is the potential impact of that proposal, this is the tangential impact it might have on the tax base, or it might have on maybe another sector. And so you must have some internal capacity inside the institution, and usually this should be either trade experts or economic experts who can be able to help you with that. And if you don't have that capacity, you must be able to find it. Because what has happened is then that you're able to then respond to that proposal and say, oh, but if we say this, this is what will be the impact. And then you can have a back and forth conversation. So it's important to then, that's why I'm saying it's important to build internal capacity, so that you have the capacity to do that analysis internally and to do it hopefully as fast as possible, so that you can give a timely response to the emergency. But also is to say that don't wait until you have the full answer. since the recommendations are just as important as the engagement. So being able to then say, we've come for a brainstorm, we've come for a conversation, these are some of the issues we're concerned about, is still good enough even if you don't have the full detailed memorandum. And one of the outcomes of that meeting or engagement with government could be, okay, please go back and prepare for us clear memoranda, which then gives you more time to engage with the team that you have, rather than just waiting until you have a perfect document, because the crisis also is changing and morphing even as time passes. Okay, so Olusola is asking, how can associations influence more for government to intervene on issues raised for sustaining businesses to mitigate the impact of COVID-19? Oh, the question is really, how can you build influence so that associations are actually being listened to by government? And building that influence really is important, because then you're trying to show government that you're a partner and that they should consider your proposals and that they should take them seriously. And so I would say this, first of all, understand that this is the long journey. This is not just going to be about COVID-19. It's also likely to be about what relationships did you have before? How can you strengthen and deepen those relationships during the crisis? And then how can you use those relationships going forward? And so in terms of developing influence is some of the examples that I gave earlier, which included shows of partnership, calls to support, those types of things. But then beyond that is also, to what extent are you able to present very well thought out, not just issues, but propose solutions? So you want to raise issues, but remember that government is trying to get to answers. So just to put a question on the table is not enough. So yet again, saying you need to go back and say, this is what we are proposing. We know that this is the impact that COVID-19 is having. This is what we think will need to be done going forward in order to safeguard businesses and also the larger economy. So being clear about what your proposals are, what your solutions are that you're going to put on the table, then you would be able to then have success and to be able to be listened to. But it's a long journey. It's a long journey, and take this chance or take this crisis as, I know there's a phrase that's going around everywhere, never waste a crisis. But from an advocacy perspective, it's true. This is the time when, as difficult as it is to engage, this is the time when government is more likely to be grateful for your input and to appreciate the value that you've added to the table. So don't waste the crisis. Take this opportunity to build the relationship that you would then be able to enjoy even after the crisis is done. So back to you, Michael. Thank
you, Rachel. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Thank you, everybody in attendance, for joining us today and for all of your input and questions. I think this is a really constructive session. And Rachel, I think you have done a great job in empowering us to go out and do better advocacy work. So I thank you for that. I also quickly want to thank a few of my colleagues. I want to thank Ryan Musser and Lars Benson on the Africa team here. They were in attendance today. And also for Ben Kiragu, who connected us to Rachel and allowed for this wonderful presentation to happen. So thank you, Ben, for doing that and for all of your work. As we look ahead, we will have another presentation next week on the elements of a good survey. And so we'll be discussing some of the technical elements of conducting a good survey, which goes very much hand in hand with this advocacy work, I believe, in terms of understanding what members in our associations need and what kind of things that they are looking for us to advocate for them. And so this should be a great presentation, and it's going to be fairly technical and talk about how to make quality and impactful surveys, which should be beneficial. So thank you again, all of you, for joining us. Thank you, Rachel, for your wonderful contributions.
Thank you.
And we will be sending out the slides and making this video presentation available on our website. And I will piggyback on what Ryan, my colleagues, just put in the chat. We do have a weekly newsletter that we send out to all of our associations contacts that many of you are a part of. If you're not on that, please sign up using the link that Ryan just shared. We'd love to be in touch with you and love to create that relationship. So thank you, everybody, again. And thank you, Rachel, one more time.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the wonderful engagement.
Of course. Have a good evening, everyone.
Okay.
Bye-bye.